back to Brewery Crawl. I'm your host, Alan Kramer, and today we're in Atlanta, Georgia at the Red Brick Brewing Company. Before we get started, let's go meet with Anthony Rodriguez, who's the promotions manager, and he's going to tell us a little bit about Red Brick. Let's go. All right, we're here with Anthony Rodriguez, the promotions manager of Red Brick. So Anthony, tell us a little bit about Red Brick.
Well, Red Brick is actually the oldest brewery in Georgia, founded in 1993. So we are 17 years old currently. We were founded just after the Georgia passed the laws to allow breweries to, or people to start brewing again in Georgia. So first brewery to open since the 50s. We've got 4 main beers that we brew year round: the brown ale, the blonde ale, the pale ale, and the porter. We also have 4 seasonals: our summer Hefeweizen, our Oktoberfest, our winter Belgian ale, and our spring Hellesbock.
Nice. All right. Well, let's go take a little tour, see how you make your beer.
Okay.
Your beer.
This is where we begin. Show us how it's made. This is where it starts. These are actually HLT tanks, which are the hot liquor tanks. Hot liquor to a brewer is just hot water. We keep this water at 160 degrees because that's the temperature that's best used to extract sugars from the malt later in the process. So we'll actually keep them inside this tank, which is stainless steel lined, but wooden outside just for insulation. And we'll actually use this water, and later in the process we'll move on to the mixing.
Alright, step 2, let's find out what's next after the hot water.
Alright, so after the hot liquor tanks, what we do is we're actually going to connect that to the mixer. We'll move the mixer over here underneath this silo of grain. We've actually got grain prepared in here for whatever beer we're going to brew at the moment. We'll take this mixer, move it underneath, hook the hot water up, and then start mixing the grain and the hot water together. They'll come out of this gray pipe right here through the metal arm, which is on top of the mash tun. It's called a spar jar. It'll come out of that spar jar and into the mash tun, creating a swirling motion inside. At the bottom of the mash tun is a false bottom, just a porous bottom. The grain will actually start to settle on the bottom, and the hot water will filter through. As the hot water filters through, it's extracting the sugars and the colors and the flavors from the malt. Once it goes past the false bottom, it starts settling in the actual bottom of the mash tun. And during that process, it starts getting pulled into the kettle. When you've got that colored flavored sugar water, essentially, that's called wort, or wort. Once you've got that, when you've gone through the mashing process, we'll go into the kettle, and then we'll move on to the kettle, and that's where we'll be adding the hops.
Well, the grain come out of there and the wort comes in and goes into the kettle.
The grain actually stays in the mash tun, and the wort comes out and goes into the kettle. The colored flavored sugar water.
Great. Alright, so now we got the sugar water. Let's see what happens next. Okay, next, after we got the wort coming into this kettle, now what happens?
Well, the next process is we're actually going to boil the wort. We're going to add the hops to the kettle, depending on what kind of hops you're going to use. There's all sorts of different hops. We can use different families of hops, different kinds of hops. There's bittering hops and aroma hops, and the difference is acid content in the hops, as well as different families of hops. So we'll take the hops, we'll add it to the kettle depending on what kind of beer we're making, and we'll boil it. What we're essentially doing is we're getting three main things from the hops. First is aroma. The aroma you get from beer comes from the hops. The second is the bitterness. So you'll get some bitterness from it. So depending on how many hops you add, will affect how much bittering you have in the beer. And then the third is preservative. It's actually a natural preservative, so it helps the beer last longer. So once we've gone through the boiling process in the kettle, we've got to cool the beer down, so we actually move through the chiller, or we've got to cool the wort down. So we go through the chiller, and it cools it down just like a radiator on a car. It runs through, there's cold water running through it as the wort passes through it. From there, it cools down and then goes into the fermentation tanks, and that'll be our next process.
Alright, well let's go see what the fermentation tanks look like. Now we're after the fermentation tank. Tell us about that.
The fermentation tanks is where the wort goes after it's been cooled down. It's actually going to be added to a live product, which is going to be our yeast, which is our 4th ingredient. So essentially we have water, malt, hops and yeast. Yeast being our last ingredient. We're going to let the beer ferment, and what fermentation is where the yeast start eating the sugars that we extracted earlier in the process. When they eat those sugars, they give off two products. One is CO2. During the fermentation process, we'll let the CO2 escape. We don't need it in this process. And the second is alcohol. Alcohol we're definitely going to keep because that's everyone's favorite ingredient. Sure. So once while it's fermenting, the yeast will actually keep reproducing and creating more and more yeast. So they'll start eating more and more sugar. So if you're making an ale, the fermentation process lasts about 2 weeks average. And for a lager, it takes about 2 months average. Wow. So once you've gone through this process of either 2 weeks or 2 months, we're going to move on to the carbonation process because we've let all the CO2 escape during the fermentation.
Okay, so now it's all in there, it's ready to go,
It's ready to go, all we need to do is carbonate it. So actually we'll just go ahead and move on to the next process, which would be to move into the bright tanks, which are these 2 tanks closest to us. The ones past these 2 tanks are the fermentation tanks, which actually have a conical bottom. These 2 bright tanks closest to us have a flat bottom. What's in the bottom of that bright tank is what's called a bright stone. A bright stone is just a porous rock, and what we do is we feed CO2 through it. The CO2, it breaks the CO2 down into tiny, tiny little bubbles. And under pressure for a couple of hours, we can actually cause the CO2 and H2O to bond, and that's how you get your carbonation. So once we've gone through that process, we've got a carbonated, ready-to-go beer, and it's ready for kegging or bottling.
Great. All right, well, now we're ready to bottle. We're ready to see the bottling.
We're ready for the bottling process.
All right. Well, now we've seen how the beer is made. Now let's see how it's bottled. All right. Now we're ready to see how the beer is actually taken and bottled and ready to consume.
Right. You can actually see they're bottling right now. What they do is they'll actually hook the hose up to the filler, which is right behind the guy in the white shirt, or right in front of the guy in the white shirt. There's pistons on that filler that'll actually go inside the bottle, fill from the bottom up so that we don't break the carbonation bond. And then it shuts off just like a gas nozzle. There's little holes that can tell when it's full, so it shuts off. Just before that process, we've got a guy right here who's putting bottles on the line. You can see he's opening up a pallet of bottles right now. He'll put bottles on the conveyor belt right there. And as it passes through the conveyor belt, it'll be labeled. The bottles are labeled automatically, and then they're set right there. The guy in the white shirt, Sam, will actually take the bottles, sanitize them just to make sure there's nothing in them. Because the #1 rule in brewing is sanitation, so you want to make sure every bottle's clean. So we take the bottles, sanitize them, then we move on to the process I was speaking of earlier, where he sets them on the filler, and they're each filled 6 at a time. We can actually bottle a 6-pack every 13 seconds. It seems fast. It still takes a long time. There's actually there's many bigger breweries that have better systems that bottle a lot faster. But for us, this works great. And it's a lot faster than our old system, which is actually a 5-ton rotary filler that bottled probably 5 times slower.
Well, it's handmade beer. That's what you want.
That's exactly this is a craft brewery, and that's the way it goes.
Excellent. Well, you know, when you put the beer in, when you put it in, it doesn't foam up. There's no head on the beer when you.
No, that's why the nozzles actually go into. We start filling from the bottom up, just to keep from getting that foam that you would if you were to just pour it directly in there.
Sure. And that's it. That's the whole process right there.
That's the process. After that, it's automatically capped. It's piston capped and put into cases. Those cases are put on the pallets, and then they automatically go right into our cooler, and they're kept cold until they go out to our distributor. From there, they go out to the stores.
Well, excellent. Well, I appreciate it, Anthony. Thanks for walking us around. Thanks for coming to brewerycrawl.com. Thanks to Red Brick for having us around to tour the brewery. Remember that good beer is made, but great beer is crafted. Look for us soon on the Travel Channel. Cheers.